Hello and welcome to my lecture review using the JBL book, Risk Management Fundamentals. This book is written by Gibson and Andy Igonor. It's again, Managing Risk in Information Systems, 3rd edition. It is a Jones and Bartlett book, ISBN number 9781284183719. Again, they own all the copyrights. All I am doing is preparing lecture review for the PowerPoints that they own the rights to. So with that said, let's jump in and let's see what we can do. Hello and welcome to Chapter 12, Mitigating Risk with the Business Impact Analysis, BIA. Interesting part with BIA is this is an underutilized tool. So that's one thing. Also, oftentimes this is more of a business tool. BIA allows us to prioritize and rank systems, processes, and all of that. That way, if we know in an emergency, hey, how do we recover? The BIA has already outlined what systems are the most critical and which ones need to be given the most priority. So, for example, if our systems are down, our web server and our phone system is down, who has the higher priority? Well, the BIA already outlined all the systems, all the applications, and rank them and prioritize them. That way we just check what is the higher priority, and that's the one that we recover. Because if we're doing e-commerce, then that might be one path for saying that the web servers are most important. Where if we are a call center, the phone system might be more important. So understanding the different systems do play a kind of impactful role. So key concepts for this module is purpose, scope and objective, steps, mission critical business function mappings, map, best practices. Alright, so a study used to identify the impact that the results from a disruption within the business, focusing on the failure of one or more critical functions. Key terms here: maximum acceptable outage, critical business functions, critical success factors. There's more than just these 3 terms, but our book likes to focus on these 3 terms. Key indicators, key performance indicators, indicators of compromise. There are specific BIA terminology that our book just kind of glances over at a high level. So what's the purpose? What are we doing here? Identify the business impact of disruptions. Includes critical systems. It does not analyze all the IT functions. It's looking at systems, processes, and components. It allows us to map stakeholder-identified mission-critical systems and prioritize them. Compliance issues are often driven by our impact analysis, and the BIA does provide input into other systems like a business continuity plan and our risk assessment. They work hand in hand. First thing we have to do is collect some data. We have to figure out what's going on. So we might conduct interviews with major stakeholders and key personnel. Questions should be focused on the CBF and our MAOs, and then supporting resources. The meetings or conferences should provide more interaction and can often provide richer results. Indicators of what systems are important is going to be individual, but when you get those same individuals in groups, we get a completely type of different result. So meetings and conferences, more interaction. Interaction is the key here. Offer an online form or questionnaire option as well. That way there can be some follow-up, because some people don't do well person to person. what are the 7 steps for our contingency planning? Develop the policy statement. Conduct the BIA. Identify preventative controls. Create the contingency strategy. Strategy here. Develop a information system contingency plan. This is a strategy. Here's the plan. Plan testing, training, and exercises. Ensure plan maintenance, and when appropriate, rinse and repeat. These plans are not always one and done. A lot of them are living, breathing documents, so you actually have to work through the system more than once. Defining the scope allows us to figure out what we're going to be accomplishing. You want to develop the scope as early in the process as possible. It sets the boundaries, sets our limitation. The scope will affect the size of the organization. If it's a large organization, then the scope is going to be a little larger. Small organizations, the scope could include the entire organization. Large ones, that it's not reasonable. So, defining the scope of our BIA in this example, let's say for online sales, an online web server with a back-end database used for e-commerce. We might have to define what our acceptable downtimes are for those systems. The BIA could focus on the critical functions needed to support the web server. The web server, the back-end, the database communication, maybe filtering. If we are dealing with more than just that, then shipment of the product. Functions needed for this phase are distinctly different than the sales function. We need to have the database, an application server, and they need to be able to communicate with the warehouse. For the website, it's much shorter than the one for shipping. The downtime for the main website is, a pretty tight controlled feature. The downtime for the warehouse might be a little bit longer. And warehouse shipping does not ship, every second of every day. They do batches. So having a website down for, 20 minutes in the morning, that may not be that big of an issue if the website is on the warehouse side. The warehouse focuses on the shipping. If the website was down on the operational side, the sales side, that would be different because that means no inbound or incoming orders. So objectives of our BIA: input from our experts and owners and our custodians. Identify the business functions. Identify the key resources. Identify the impact. Identify recovery requirements. And then from there, you should be able to get key objectives and identify the resources and function and impact that will be needed. And the recovery requirements, so that if any of those impacts actually are realized, we have a path that we can actually recover them. Alright, so after we do this, we now have a way for us to figure out the cost versus strategy over time, so we can figure out where our optimum stand is going to be. Let me grab my pen, because again, this is going to be time. This is cost. So the goal should be that the cost is going to be very high, and the longer it goes, the issue with this is going to be the cost to recovery. As we are going, and the cost of the disruption, actually I'm going to change my colors. The longer it goes, the more expensive it gets. Cost to recover is high, shorter, and then the longer it goes on, it does decrease. So we are looking at this optimum range. Again, all of this is about balance. You need to figure out what are the costs to recovery, cost of disruption, what are the in and indirect costs for an issue. That's a big thing, is when we're trying to figure out what is the optimum range, we have to figure out, well, what's the cost going to be? What's the cost of the outage? What's the cost of a prevention control? So we do need to identify the critical business functions. The critical business functions aren't always apparent. Sometimes they're underlining. For example, an online website purchase. The business functions are the customers accessing the website, the web server accessing the database, the ordering process, and the ability to track that order. These things all have to come into play for us to rank and prioritize them. So when we're trying to identify the critical resources for the three areas that we were looking at, for example, customers accessing the website, internet access, web server, application, connectivity, access control. For the web server accessing the database server, again, web server is higher priority. Web application. This is an internal network. We have to have connectivity to the database server. We have to confirm network connectivity and, again, access control. So each one of these might have a different ranking. Order processing, the server hosting the platform, the database, the warehouse, network connectivity, and internet access at the bottom. And in reality, you could probably also do firewall and controls towards the bottom as well. There has to be some form of control and access. So identifying the MAU and the impact. Again, also refer to the maximum tolerance period disruption, the MTPD. Again, we have lots of acronyms, sadly, and we're going to get into more acronyms. This aids in determining which function needs to be recovered and restarted sooner than later. So again, this is more about the prioritization. Identifies the specialized and specific resources needed for that business function. And the impact is not solely focused on money. Like monetary needs is important, but it doesn't always need to be expressed as money. It's often expressed as relative value, high, medium, low. And can also be expressed as a number, 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, the ranking numerically is going to be more the priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, so forth. So when we're trying to identify the recovery components, we have our recovery point objective and our recovery time objective, RTO and RPO. The RTO applies to the systems or functions or processes. It's the time in which the system or function must be recovered. It needs to be equal to or less than the MOU. So, if the MOU is an hour, the RTO is an hour or less. This is time sensitive. The recovery point objective applies to data. Addressing the data warehouse. Identify the maximum amount of data loss that's acceptable. Latency. And identifying mission critical aspects of that data. So steps for the BIA: identify the environment, identify the stakeholders, identify the business functions, critical resources, the MAU and the recovery times, recovery priority points, develop your report, and if necessary, rinse and repeat. In reality, these give you what you have to do to at least do your BIA, and then you might have to fine-tune it a little bit later. Identifying the mission critical business functions. Again, these are going to be the critical success factors, CSFs. And these are any functions considered to be vital for the business to operate. Successful CSF results in performing a CBF. You have to identify what the business functions are so you can identify what the critical business functions are. So, key processes, critical factors, success factors, critical business factors, CSF, CBF, KP. Typically, experts will have the information regarding mission critical functions, but sometimes you actually have to analyze the business to figure out what they are. Mapping the functions and IT processes, literally you would rank the systems, provide them a priority. Determine the recovery options, identify priority of the systems. That way every single key system has a priority. Best practices when performing a BIA, clear objective, clear scope. Maintain your focus on that objective and scope. Do not allow for scope creep. Minimize scope creep the best you can. Use a top-down approach. Verify and vary the data that's being collected and the methods the data is being collected. Plan interviews and meetings well in advance. Organize and structure that. Avoid knee-jerk reactions and avoid easy, quick solutions. They typically look like they're easy, but in reality, normally lead to just poor judgment. Normal project management methods come into play here. All right, after that, that's it for this chapter for our BIA. We've talked about the purpose, the scope, objectives, steps, best practices. Any questions, thoughts, or concerns, please feel free to reach out. Thank you. Alrighty, well, thank you. That concludes this lecture review. Again, all material presented in this PowerPoint lecture was copyrighted by Jones and Bartlett Learning. So they own the copyright. I am just providing a lecture on the PowerPoints that they provided. With that said, if you have any questions, thoughts, issues, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me, leave a comment, get in touch with me, and I will get those addressed as quickly as I can. Thank you.